Here is an EOAlive Grande story.
He is an associate professor of intellectual and cultural history associated with the Democracy, Migration, and Movements, DEMOS, research group at Aalborg University, and he's also the head of the Language and International Studies programs. He has several books and publications on these topics. His Colloquium presentation through EOU covers a topic that's been top of mind for many Americans lately: human rights. His research has focused on the role of human rights in the recent elections cycle. The public can join his talk Thursday at 4 p.m. That's December 10th via Zoom. See the link below. Eastern Oregon, say hello to Dr. Ben Dorfman. Ben, how's it going?
Good, thanks.
Nice. So I guess we'll just start like at the very beginning. Like what got you into this? Like tell me a little bit about yourself, your backstory.
Yeah, well, sure. I come from a history background. I studied modern European history for my PhD. I've taken a pretty philosophical approach to sort of historical studies, thinking about, history as it concerns political issues and history as it concerns sort of the cultural spaces that we move through. And as I've been working through those topics, there's a kind of a theme that I kept bumping into again and again when I wasn't working in the human rights field, which is that sort of the questions of the kind of the terms of freedom and sort of the realization of the individual are sort of headline topics towards which or about which a lot of historians and cultural studies people are discussing sort of whether they are conscious of it or not. And that sort of provoked me to try to take on the theme sort of head on.
Okay. As a child, per se, growing up, where did you grow up?
I grew up sort of between New Hampshire and New York. I had a mom's family in sort of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and dad's family in around New York City. And actually had the really unique privilege of growing up with two parents who are painters and artists.
Oh, really? Like
Yep.
Straight up, that was their career.
Yep, that's what they did for an actual living. Yes.
Isn't that weird how intellectuals come from intellectuals?
Sometimes that can be the case. Yeah, sometimes.
Okay, so when we talk about this subject, you've spent quite a bit of time overseas, correct?
I have. Yeah, I've been working.
What drew you there?
There's partly a personal history to it, but I met my ex-wife, who's a Danish woman in grad school, and around the time I was finishing up my PhD, she was needing to return to Europe to finish up her master's, and so the job market for me wound up being Europe instead of the States, in a sort of immediate sense after I got done with my doctoral work.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen on Thursday. Like, can you give us a little sneak peek as to what you're going to talk about Thursday?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the books that I published over the past few years have had a lot to do with sort of applying the human rights idea to a lot of events that unfold in sort of what I and some philosophers call the life world, which is sort of kind of the immediate stream of surroundings that we find ourselves in. And a real kind of plain language way of putting this is that I think in the back of our heads, when we turn on the news at night or we crack open the newspaper and we sort of look at the events of the day, I think a lot of us are sort of measuring in the back of our heads, well, sort of what does this mean for sort of the large political concepts that really drive our world, and human rights is really sort of primary among those. So, and I also think that's the case for our confrontation with a lot of historical scenery, sort of when we look at important monuments or we are told that we're in front of an important historical scene. I think a kind of mechanism that goes off in our heads is, sort of, well, what does this have to do with sort of freedom and the progress of civilization? It's a very subtle thing, I think, that happens, but I think it's quite real for us. And somehow I think the rights vocabulary is real important in the middle of all that. So in terms of sort of looking at events that have been unfolding recently, right, not just in the United States, but also in Europe, we have some pretty divided societies that are having a difficult time talking with each other. And certainly, in some ways, that's been the case since the election here in November. And one of the things I find interesting about what are sometimes quite difficult discussions is that actually people on opposite sides of the discussion are making very much the same claims. And those claims have a lot to do with their rights and their recognition as individuals and their ability to take part in democratic systems.
Right. Do you feel like this like history pretty much repeats itself? Because I'm not a history dude. I do some research. I researched you quite a bit, actually. But do you feel like we were in a similar position, maybe not as advanced, but like during Vietnam, the separation? I mean, it's very, very similar.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I have that thought myself, because we often hear in terms of the divisions that are playing out, certainly in American society. But again, I think it's a global phenomenon. But to concentrate on the U.S. for the moment, we often hear that sort of we're in the middle of a kind of historical moment, which is different than anything else we've seen. And I think that's true in certain ways, but there are some ways in which this really resembles the world of the late 1960s and early 70s, where you have sort of the society kind of broken into a couple of camps where there's a really difficult time of the one understanding the other. But that in some ways, again, both of those camps are sort of organized around kind of what's the best way to practice democracy, what's the best way to have sort of the promises of individual freedom and a decent material life. So we're at another moment that is a bit like the culture wars of the late 60s, I'd say, in terms of debates over sort of what freedom and democracy and things like the right to security mean.
Do you think the division becomes greater before it gets smaller, or do you think we're going to start working back towards a smaller space in between the divide?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one. There's a lot of different elements that can into sort of what creates the ability for societies to find certain levels of reconciliation within themselves or not. In terms of the prognosis from here, I have my worries about this, and I have my worries in part because one of the things that might be a bit different than was the case in the late 60s or the early 70s, the Vietnam era roughly, is sort of the sources of information that people are operating in relation to. So there was a time when there was much more consensus about where you got your news from, what news meant, sort of the relationship between news or reporting or journalism and opinion, the degree to which those things are the same or not. And there was a lot more in the way of sort of, I think, common facts and a kind of common body or corpus of knowledge that a society might refer to and have some ability to engage some dialogue. And I think in our kind of postmodern world where media is sort of everywhere, and there's information streaming in all the time, and we are in kind of an infinite buffet of media options. It means some of us can really get stuck at one end of the buffet and others at the other end, and that makes things tough.
Definitely. So basically what he's saying, Eastern Oregon, is back in the Vietnam era, we didn't have people feeding us a load of BS through media. Not near as much.
Well, I think we could all agree that I don't think that the society would go to war so much over whether or not the New York Times did valuable reporting.
Absolutely
right. I mean, yeah.
Right. So is there anything else you want to add before Thursday?
No, it's really great to sort of be able to have a communication about these things, out here in the Northwest. I come out here pretty regularly now because I've got family here, and I've made it a sort of home away from home. I think that the Northwest, has a surprising diversity of sort of opinions and experiences that people are involved with. It's been great to get to know, and I think it's an important part of the country to be able to have this kind of dialogue with, and I really look forward to it in that regard.
Awesome. Eastern Oregon. He is Dr. Ben Dorfman. Where can people get your books?
They're totally available on Amazon. You can also get them through Barnes and Noble. A little on the expensive side, like most academic books are, but you can also see previews of them on stuff like Google Books too.
Yeah, I spent some time digging through those, actually. He's Dr. Ben Dorfman. I'm Dodsey. Join him Thursday, 4 p.m., Colloquium through EOU. I'll provide a link down below. Mr. Dorfman, I appreciate your time. You have a great day today.
Thanks very much. Been a pleasure being with you.